Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story. I am 70 years old, and I built my daughter's monster with my own hands. I know that because I heard her say it herself on a hidden camera, sitting in her dead mother's chair. It took 19 days last time she said, "He is tougher than Mom was." I let her believe she had won. I had one card left and 400 people to play it in front of. I am going to tell you how I got to that chair, and that camera, and that card. But first you should know where all of it actually started, which was not with a camera or a chair. It started on an ordinary Tuesday in a leather shop in Hermosa, South Dakota, with a stranger's hand closing on my wrist before I understood he had moved. His fingers were the color of tobacco and hard as bench pins, and they closed over the brace with no more apology than a vice. I have not been grabbed by a stranger since I was 19. Behind him, the shop smelled of neatsfoot oil and cut hide, and the sweet rod of leather that has been wet and dried too many times. A radio played low somewhere in the back, in a language I did not know. Outside the window, the snow came sideways off the grass country, struck the glass, and slid. He did not look at my face. He looked at the stitching. "Who put this lining in?" he said. It was not a question. His voice came from somewhere low in his chest, and he did not wait for an answer. And he did not let go. To understand why a man I had never met in my life was holding on to me like that, you have to go back 9 hours to my own bench and to a stone the size of a grain of rice. I have been a goldsmith in Rapid City, South Dakota for 50 years. My shop sits on Main Street in a brick building put up in 1910. The sign over the window says, "Francis and Daughter Goldsmiths," and I painted it myself in the summer of 1985. We make Black Hills gold. Leaves and grape clusters cut and raised by hand in 3 colors of metal, and every batch of alloy mixed at my own crucible. That morning, I was setting a 4mm sapphire into a bezel for a woman in Spearfish who wanted her mother's stone put into something she could wear. I had the stone in my tweezers. I had the pusher in my right hand. 40 years told my fingers how much pressure to give the metal, and my fingers did not listen. The stone came out of the tweezers. It made no sound. That is the thing about a stone that size. You never hear it land. You only know it is gone. I got down on the floor. 70 years old, on my knees on a wood floor with half a century of gold dust ground into the seams, running my palm over the boards in the dark under the bench. A man learns to sweep a floor with his hand and not his eyes. You go slow, and you go in lines the way you would mow a yard. 40 minutes. My knees were finished at 15. Jericho found it. He is 29, and he has worked for me since he was 17, and he put it back in my palm and said nothing, which was worse than if he had. I sat down again and turned on the lamp, and there it was. A ring of yellow around the bulb, not a glare. A ring the color of weak tea sitting around every light in that room, like something painted on the air. It had been 3 months. 3 months of the ring and of waking with my mouth full of copper and of a tremor that came and went like weather. But the ring was the one that mattered. A man who mixes green gold and rose gold and yellow gold by eye cannot afford a wash of yellow over everything he looks at. I had begun asking Jericho to check my alloys. I told him it was to teach him. He let me say it. I went to doctors. I went to 4 of them. They took my blood twice. They ran a stress test and a scan of my head that cost more than my first truck, and then a young man in a clean coat told me my heart was the heart of a man 20 years younger, and there was nothing on the film. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said the word age, and he said it with kindness, which is how I knew he had stopped looking. I did not go back after that. I want you to understand why, because it was the first thing I did wrong. And it was nowhere near the last. There is another word that lives behind the word age. Every man past 65 knows the one I mean. Nobody says it out loud in a room with his family sitting in it. And a man who has spent his life being the one they bring the work to when it has to be right does not walk in and ask a stranger to write that word on a form with his name at the top. So I worked. That is what I have always done with a thing I cannot carry. I go down to the bench and I put my hands on metal. The brace was on my right wrist where it had been since Christmas. My daughter gave it to me. Hand-stitched leather with a steel stay and a shearling lining that lay against the bare skin of my forearm 14 hours a day. She put it in my hands on Christmas morning, and she said, "Your hands, Dad, your hands." I found a man who does good work. She had wrapped it herself. She is not a woman who wraps things. The paper was creased where she had folded it twice to make it lie flat, and underneath was a piece of tape that had been put on and pulled off and put on again. I saw that tape. I put it away with the rest of the evidence that my daughter was still in there under all of it. The strap tore at 2 in the afternoon. Jericho offered to run it down for me. I told him no. I have driven myself everywhere since I was 16 years old. I was not going to sit in my own shop while a young man ran my errands because my hands had gone stupid. The road south out of Rapid City runs along the edge of the hills. The pine stands black on your right in the afternoon, and on your left, the flat opens out and goes until it stops being land and starts being weather. I drove it that day with the torn brace on the seat beside me, and I looked over at it twice at the stop signs, and both times I looked away. Hermosa is 40 minutes south. 400 people, 1 crossroads, 1 gas station. Thomas de la Cruz has stitched leather in that town for 55 years. Saddles and harness and braces for men who wore their bodies out on horses and machines. I had never met him. My daughter had. And now he had my wrist in his hand, and he was not looking at my face. He turned the brace over. He ran his thumb down the outer seam, and something went out of his shoulders. The outer stitching was his, he said. He would know his own hand anywhere. The man who ordered it asked for the outside only and said he would see to the lining himself. Then he did the thing I did not expect. He brought the brace up to his face and he smelled it. He held it there 3 seconds. When he lowered it, his eyes had changed, and behind him on the counter was a paper ledger with a rubber band around it. And I remember thinking it was a strange thing for a man to still keep his orders in a book. "Take it off," he said. Now, I took it off. That is the whole of it. A man tells you to take a thing off your body, and you argue with him for 4 seconds, and then you take it off. Because some part of you has been waiting 3 months for somebody to finally tell you what is wrong with you. He laid it on the counter with the inside turned up. Then he took a hook knife out of a drawer, set the point under the edge of the lining, and picked the stitches one at a time. I stood there and watched a stranger open my daughter's Christmas present with a knife. The shearling came away in 1 piece. Under it, there was a pad. Gray felt cut to the shape of the steel stay, thicker than padding has any business being, and darker through the middle where it had lain against my arm for 11 weeks. He did not touch it. He turned the whole brace over with the flat of the knife, the way you turn something on a stove. I asked him what it was. He said he did not know. He said he had sewn a plain felt lining under a shearling face on 900 braces in his life, and not one of them had ever looked like that, and not one of them had ever had a smell. I told him my daughter had it made for me. I said it the way a man says a thing he expects will settle the matter. He looked up. It was the first time since I walked in that he had looked at my face instead of my hands. He said it was not a woman who came in and ordered it. I did not ask him who it was. I want that on the record because I have gone over it 1,000 times since. He had a ledger with a rubber band around it sitting 2 feet from his elbow, and all I had to do was ask him to open it, and I did not ask. I told him it was probably a friend of hers doing her a favor. He said nothing to that. He wrapped the brace and the pad in a piece of butcher paper, folded the ends the way you fold a sandwich, and pushed it across the counter. And he did not charge me for the strap. I sat in my truck in his gravel lot for 40 minutes with the engine off. The cold came up through the floorboards and into my boots, and after a while, into my knees. The snow had quit. Across the road, the gas station sign turned on, and the boy came out and squeegeed the ice off a pump handle and went back in. I did the thing that men my age do. I built the reasonable story. Some cut-rate medical outfit sells a gel pad for arthritis. My daughter buys it because she saw it advertised somewhere. She takes it to a leatherman to have it sewn in nice because she wanted it to look like something and not like a drugstore brace. That is a story. It has no holes in it that you can see from the outside. Then I turned the key and drove home to Rapid City with the butcher paper on the seat where the brace had been. The shop was still open when I got in a little after 5. Angie Mayo was at the front counter with a box of invitations and a felt pen addressing them by hand because she says a printed name looks like a bill. Angie has run my front counter for 30 years. She can tell you the anniversary date of every couple whose rings we made, and she does tell you whether you asked or not. She held one up and said we were at 310. 50 years in business, and she wanted 400 people in a room to say so out loud. I said that was fine. I went on back. Jericho was at the stamping block, finishing the day. That is the last thing we do. Everything that leaves this shop gets the mark, and the mark goes on by hand with a steel punch and 1 hit of the hammer. Not 2. 2 hits and you get a ghost of the first strike beside it, and the piece is ruined. He had a pendant in the block, a grape cluster in green gold on a yellow leaf, and he set the punch and looked at me the way he does when he wants permission he does not need. I took the punch out of his hand. I have done that maybe 8,000 times. It is an F inside an oval, and under the F there are 2 dots. Jericho has stamped that mark for 12 years, and he had never asked me about the dots, and that evening, for whatever reason, he asked. I told him I cut that punch in the spring of 1985. I told him the F was for the shop, and the first dot was for me. And I told him the second dot went on that punch 4 days after my daughter was born, because I was 30 years old, and I could not think of a better way to say what I meant. He said that was a good thing to put on a piece of work. I set the punch and hit it once and handed the pendant back to him. The bench next to mine is my father's. His 11 gravers are in the rack, mushroom handles worn down in a curve that fits my palm, because it fit his first. He never gave them to me. A cousin mailed them out of Ohio in a coffee can in 1981. 6 weeks after the funeral I was not told about until it was over. My father and I said our last words to each other when I was 19 years old, and neither of us took them back. Past the gravers on the corner of Adeline's bench, there is a ring in a paper tray under 4 years of dust. It is a 40-year band, yellow gold, and I was going to run a rose gold vine around it because she liked the rose better and would not say so. I had the vine drawn and the stock rolled. She went down on the kitchen floor on a Saturday morning in March, and the paper said the word was arrhythmia, and I have not touched that tray since. I said her name out loud that evening. I do not remember why. Something about the invitations. Jericho picked up the pendant and carried it into the polishing room and shut the door. He did not need to be in the polishing room. There was nothing in his hands that needed a wheel. I stood there and looked at that closed door, and I knew the way you know a wrong note, that the boy had walked out of a room to keep from being in it while I talked about my wife. I did not ask him. I have never once asked him. I went into the back office and shut my own door, and I called my daughter. It rang 9 times. She picked up on the 9th, and her voice came out of the bottom of something thick and slow, the way a voice is when a person has been asleep and does not want you to know it. It was 10 minutes past 6 in the evening. There is not one photograph in my daughter's apartment. I had been in it maybe 5 times, and I had never noticed that until I stood in her front hall that night with a package of butcher paper under my arm. Big rooms. A building on the west side that went up 2 years ago, $1,800 a month, and I write the check. Furniture with the tag still on the underside. A candle burning on the counter, one of the big ones in a jar. And under it, that other smell that a candle is for. Nothing on the walls, but the paint that came with the place. There is a nail over her sofa with nothing hanging on it. I made her a piece 2 Christmases back, a small oval with her mother's initial cut into it, and I have thought about that empty nail more times since than I have thought about almost anything else in this whole business. Her mother is in a box in my hall closet. 4 albums of her and the girl who grew up in those pictures does not keep a single one. I put the paper on the kitchen island and folded it open and asked her what was in the brace she gave me. She did not look at it. That was the first thing. A person looks at a thing on a counter, even a stranger looks, and my daughter kept her eyes on my face and said, "Dad, sit down. You are shaking." I said I was not shaking. I was shaking. She got me a glass of water I did not drink. She said the word arthritis and the word inflammation. She asked me if I had eaten. She asked whether Angie had the invitations out yet. She asked about the shop. She asked me a second time whether I had eaten, and at one point, she took a rag and wiped down a stretch of counter that was already clean. I understand now that every word my daughter said in those 20 minutes was said to fill 20 minutes. Then the door opened behind me, and Callan Chase came in with snow on his shoulders, and he was wearing the white coat. He had it on over a sweater at 7:30 at night, in a residential building, walking into his girlfriend's kitchen. I saw it. I want to be honest about how little I did with what I saw. Callan has been with my daughter 3 years. He shook my hand and said he was glad I came, and he did not once ask why I was there, which means he already knew. And he went around the island and looked down at the gray pad in the butcher paper the way a man looks at a form he has filled out before. He asked me if the skin under it had been itching. I said it had. He nodded, like that settled something, and asked how the base of my thumb had been in the mornings. Not my wrist, the base of my thumb. He named the joint. He said the word for the nerve that runs through the tunnel in a man's wrist, and he said it the way you say a word you have said 100 times. And then he told me that he and Dream had gone to a compounding pharmacy in September and had a topical anti-inflammatory made up to be worn against the skin all day instead of swallowed, because at 70 years old the pills eat a man's stomach and his kidneys before they touch his hands. The gel goes in the felt carrier, he said. The carrier goes under the lining. He said the Leatherman was told to sew the outside and leave the inside alone, because the carrier has to be changed, and he did not want it stitched shut. Everything he said fit. Every single thing. It fit the smell, and it fit the felt, and it fit a man in a shop in Hermosa saying somebody wanted only the outside sewn. I told him about the rings around the lights. He went quiet a moment. Then he said that was not the gel. He said a man past 70 who has spent 50 years bent under a bench lamp and a torch ought to see an eye doctor and not a family doctor, and he was sorry, and he knew that was not what I wanted to hear. He was the only person in 3 months who did not tell me it was age. He handed me a different door to walk through. I walked through it. It was the wrong one, and he knew which one it was when he opened it. I asked why nobody told me, and that is when my daughter started to cry. She said because you would not have worn it. She said you have not taken so much as an aspirin since Mom died. You throw away the bottles. You tell Angie to throw away the bottles. She said I sat in your shop in October and watched you try to hold a pair of tweezers, and I went out to my car and I could not drive. Then she said the thing. She said, I already lost Mom. Do not make me stand there and watch you go too. I want to tell you what that did, because if you have children, you already know. And if you do not, no amount of me talking will get it across. 41 years. Every school she was thrown out of, every counselor, every time she took cash out of the register and looked me in the eye about it. Every one of the 4 times I paid for a bed in a place with a locked door. And underneath every one of those years, the same wire running through. That somewhere in there is the girl who wrapped a present with her own hands. And if I hold the door open long enough, she will come back through it. She said her mother's name, and I stopped being a man looking at evidence. I apologized to my daughter. In her kitchen, with the pad from that brace open on the counter between us, I told her I was sorry for what I had come there thinking. And then, because apologizing was not enough for me, because I have never in my life been able to say a thing and leave it said, I told her I would put another 6 months of her rent in the account in the morning. She hugged me. She smelled like the candle. Callan picked up the butcher paper and folded the ends over. He said, let me take this. He said the carrier was past due for a change anyway, that they had a milder formulation, that the itching meant the concentration was wrong for my skin. He said he would have it back to me in 2 days, and I should not wear it until then. I handed my daughter's boyfriend the thing that was killing me, and I asked him to fix it. That is the sentence. I have said it out loud exactly twice in my life, and both times were under oath. I drove home across town on Sheridan Lake Road, with the wipers going and the heater on my knees, and I want you to know the last true thing about that night. I felt light. I felt better than I had felt in 3 months. Some load I had been carrying up the stairs since a man in Hermosa put his hand on my wrist had been taken off me, and I sat at a red light on a Tuesday night, and I was grateful. That is the part I have never been able to get out from under. Not the brace, not the pad on the counter, the gratitude. On the fourth morning, I poured a cup of coffee and did not spill it. I stood at my own kitchen counter in my own house and watched my hand hold a full cup level all the way to the table. And then I set it down and sat there and looked at it the way you look at a stranger who has your father's face. 3 days without that brace on my arm. I had not planned anything. Callan said 2 days, and 2 days went by and nobody came. And I did not chase it because a man who has been sick for a season does not go hunting for his medicine when he has started to feel like himself. The tremor went first, then the copper taste. On the third night, I slept until the alarm and woke up angry at the alarm, which I had not done since the fall. I did not say a word about it at the shop. This was not cunning. I had nothing to be cunning about yet. It was pride. Angie and Jericho had spent the winter watching me drop things and pretend I had not. And I was not about to walk in and announce that I was better, because to announce it is to admit there had been something to be better from. So I worked and they watched me work, and neither of them said anything either. On the fifth morning, I set a stone. It was the sapphire, the one that went on the floor. I had it in the tweezers and the bezel in the block, and I brought the pusher down on the metal and rolled the edge over that stone in one pass, the way I have done it since I was 22 years old. And the burnisher went round, and the seat came up bright, and it was done. And it took me maybe 90 seconds. In January, that same setting had taken me 2 hours, and I had it apart twice. I sat back. Then I reached into the tray on the left side of my bench where I keep scrap, and I took out 2 clippings I had put there in December, and I laid them on the white paper. One is green gold, one is yellow. For 3 months, those 2 pieces of metal had been the same color. I want you to understand what I am telling you. I have mixed alloy by eye at that bench for 50 years. Green gold is my own recipe, my father's before mine, and a man in Sioux Falls once drove 4 hours to buy a bracelet because of what my green does next to my yellow. And all winter, I had been laying them side by side and seeing one metal. They were not the same color that morning. They were not close. The green sat there cold and a little gray, the way it is supposed to. And the yellow was the yellow I have been mixing since Carter was president. And I put my hands over my face, and I stayed like that for a while. Angie came as far as the doorway. Then she went back out front and left me alone, which after 30 years is the most she has ever done for me. Callan brought the brace back that night. He came to the house. He was pleasant about it. He apologized for the delay and said the pharmacy had to make up a fresh carrier from scratch. And he had it in a paper bag with the top rolled down. And he stood in my front hall and told me the new formulation was gentler and I should not notice any itching. The stitching was neat. Not his work and not De La Cruz either, but neat. My daughter had called me twice that week. Both times she asked whether I had it back on yet. Both times I told her I would. I remember thinking it was good to hear her worried about me over something that was not money. I told him I had been getting along fine without it. He said that was good. He said that was exactly what they wanted. And then he said that a man does not stop a course of treatment on the week he starts feeling better. That is precisely when men my age quit and lose all the ground they gained, and he had watched his own grandfather do it. I put it on the next night. I want to say I hesitated. I did not. I sat on the edge of my bed with that brace in my hands, and the only thing in my head was my daughter crying in her kitchen. And I strapped it on and lay down and slept 11 hours. When I woke up, I could not get off the mattress. The room went over sideways when I lifted my head. I got my feet on the floor, and the floor came up, and I put my hand out for the nightstand and took the lamp down with it. And I sat there on the carpet in the broken glass in my underwear at 7 o'clock in the morning, 70 years old, with my heart going like something trying to get out of a sack. I want you to know that I was not frightened. I was past frightened. I lay on that floor, and I did the arithmetic. Off 5 days, better every day. On one night, and this. I ripped it off my arm and threw it, and it hit the closet door. And then I crawled to the bathroom and was sick. And then I got dressed, and I drove to Hermosa. De La Cruz did not say good morning. He looked at me once and went and got the hook knife. He had the lining picked out in under a minute, and he stood there with the thing open in his hands. And he said it had been opened again. He said, "This is new. Somebody has been in here inside the last week, and the stitch is a machine stitch, and they used the wrong weight of thread." I asked him to open his book. He wiped his hands on his apron first. Then he took the rubber band off that ledger and licked his thumb and went back through it. And it took him a while, because he writes every job in that book by hand. And he has been writing in books like that since 1971. He found it, and he turned it around on the counter so I could read it. There was the job. Outer seam only, customer supplies lining. There was a phone number in the margin. And in the name column, in a leather man's block letters, was a name that was not my daughter's, Callan Chase. And beside it, in the date column, was the 15th of September. I stood in that shop, and I heard the radio in the back, and the tick of the propane heater, and somebody's diesel going by out on the road. The paper of that ledger was soft at the corner from being turned. There was a dead fly on the sill behind the register. De la Cruz did not say anything. He put his hand flat on the counter beside the book and left it there. Because on the 12th of September, in my shop, in front of Angie and Jericho and my daughter, I had said out loud what I was going to do with the business when I was gone. Not to her, into a trust, to the men and women at the benches. I did not do it to punish her, and I want that understood. I did it because I have watched 3 shops like mine in the state get sold off to a chain out of Denver the month after the old man went in the ground. And I was not going to have my father's mark stamped on a case of imported castings in a mall. I said it plain, standing right there by the bench. Jericho put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor, and his ears went red. Angie cried, which she will tell you she did not. And my daughter stood up by the front counter, with her coat still on, and she smiled at me, and she said it was the right thing to do. 3 days. She gave herself 3 days. I have sold gold to people for 50 years. I know the face a man wants to see before he opens his wallet, and I know the face a woman wants to see when she brings in her mother's ring and asks what can be done with it. And I have worn both of those faces so long that I no longer know where I keep them. That is the only thing I had, so that is what I used. De la Cruz told me to burn it. He stood there in that shop with the brace open in his hands, and he told me to put it in his stove, and then to drive to the sheriff in Custer and put the leather on the desk and say the words out loud. I asked him what I would be putting on that desk. A pad of felt, a page out of a leather man's book with a name in it, a 70-year-old man with a shake in his hands and a ring around every light he looks at, saying that his daughter and her boyfriend are killing him. He did not answer because there is no answer. I told him the truth, which is that the sickness was the only thing keeping me alive. As long as I was going down at the speed they expected, nobody had to hurry. The morning I got well would be the morning somebody had to think of something faster, and the next thing might be a set of stairs or a car or something in a cup, and I would not see it coming because I would not know what I was looking for. He said, "So you will wear it." I said I would wear it until I had a piece of paper from a laboratory with a chemical name on it, and until I had them saying it out loud where a machine could hear them. He handed it back to me. He did not want to. I could see the whole of him not wanting to. I strapped it on in his gravel lot with the engine running. I have done some hard things with my hands. I have soldered a wedding band back together for a widow at 11 o'clock at night, and I have carried my wife's bench chair out of the way of the paramedics. And I have never in my life done anything as hard as pulling that strap through the buckle and hearing it click. The road home took 40 minutes, and I used all of it. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about pretending to be sick. You do not have to invent it. I had spent 3 months learning that walk, the one where you take the doorframe with your left hand every time, whether you need it or not. I had learned to set a cup down before I turned around. I knew what my own voice did when I was tired, how it came out a half-step slow, how I would start a sentence and lose the front of it. All I had to do was stop hiding it. That is what I had been doing since Christmas, and neither of them had ever once seen it, because I am good and because they were not looking at me. They were looking at a clock. The next morning I called my daughter and told her I was not well and asked her to come by the shop. I want that noted because it was the first thing I did as something other than a man having a thing done to him. I did not wait for her. I sent for her. They came a little after 4. She had 2 coffees, and Callan had his hands in his coat, and neither of them took the chair by the north window, because in 4 years nobody has taken that chair. It is not a rule. Nobody made it a rule. It just does not get sat in. There is a clock on the wall over the door to the polishing room. I hung it in 1984. It has a second hand you can hear in a quiet shop. I went down between the benches at about 10 past 4. I did it right. I did not clutch anything, because men do not clutch, they reach and miss. I went sideways into the corner of my own bench and took a tray of findings down with me, and 400 jump rings went across that floor like water. And I ended up on my side on the boards with my cheek on the wood and my eyes almost shut. Then I lay there and listened to my life. Callan came down. I will give him that much, and it cost me something to give it. He was on his knees beside me in about 2 seconds, and I felt his fingers go to the side of my throat. My daughter did not move. I could see her boots. That is all I could see, one strip of the room under my own eyelashes. And those boots stayed exactly where they were, 8 feet away, next to the display case. She said, "Is he still breathing?" Not Dad. Not call somebody. 6 words in the voice you use at a counter when the girl has gone in the back to look for your size. And then she turned her wrist over and looked at the time. I heard Callan say something to her low, and I heard her say something back that I did not get. And the second hand on that clock went around one whole time while my daughter stood in my shop and waited for me to be finished. Here is the part I have never told anybody, and I am only telling it now because I said I would tell all of it. Lying on that floor, I was not sad. Something in me came loose and let go, and what came in behind it was relief. Because if she had gotten down on that floor with me, if she had put one hand on my face, I do not know that I could have done what I did afterward. She made it easy. My daughter stood 8 feet away and checked the time and made the whole rest of it easy for me. Jericho came out of the back at a run. He got a hand under each of my arms and he brought me up off that floor with no more strain than lifting a crate. And he put me in a chair, and he put a rag from his apron in my hand for no reason, and he stayed crouched in front of me. They left 20 minutes later. She kissed the top of my head on her way out. Callan said the word hospital twice and let her talk him out of it. Jericho did not clean up the jump rings. He stood at the front window with his back to me and watched her car go out onto Main Street and turned. In 12 years, that boy has never called me Alfredo. It is Mr. Francis every day. And one time, when he was 19 and had walking pneumonia, and I drove him to the clinic, he called me something else and has never done it again. He turned around from that window and his face was not the face of a boy who had just watched an old man fall down. He said, "Mr. Francis." He said, "I need to tell you something." He said it standing up with his back to the window in about 90 seconds, 3 times. October of last year, a pair of earrings out of the case while Angie was at lunch. January, $40 out of the drawer that he watched her take. 2 weeks before Christmas, a casting grain jar off the shelf in the back. And he said he only knew the weight was wrong because he had poured that jar himself. He said he had not told me because he was not sure the first time, and because by the 3rd time, he had already not told me twice. I said I understood that better than he thought I did. He nodded. He looked down at the jump rings on the floor. And then he did a thing I have gone over about 400 times since, which is that he opened his mouth and he took a breath, the way a man does when the next sentence is already lined up behind his teeth, and then he shut it again. He said, "That is all." It was not all. I knew it was not all, standing right there in my own shop, and I let it go because I had a laboratory to find and a daughter to bury in a hole she had dug herself, and because in 50 years I have never once made a man say a thing he was not ready to say. That is on me too. Everything in this story that is on me is the same thing wearing a different coat. The lawyer came the next morning at 9. I heard the bell over the front door and Angie's voice going up at the end, the way it does when somebody walks in that she does not know. And then boots in the hall, and then my daughter's boots behind them. His name was Daxton Gregory. He came into my workshop in a good coat with a good briefcase, and he smiled at me before he said anything at all. Not after, before. He came around the corner of the bench with his hand out, and the smile already finished on his face, like a man who has been paid to arrive smiling. He never once looked me in the eye. He looked at my hands, and at the brace, and at the tremor, and then somewhere past my ear at the wall. My daughter stopped in the doorway. She did not come in. She stood in the frame with one shoulder against it, and her coat on, and in 50 years of that girl running loose through my shop, climbing on my stool, eating her lunch on my bench, she has never in her life stood in that doorway and not come in. Gregory said he understood I had been having some difficulty. He said his firm handles a great deal of what he called elder transition, and he wanted me to know that what he was going to put in front of me was the most common document in his practice, and that half his clients tell him afterward they wish they had done it a year sooner. He asked if he could use my bench. I said he could use the end of it. He laid out 3 sets: a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive, and the third one I did not need him to read to me, because I have signed my name under enough headings in 50 years to know one when it is upside down at 4 feet. It was an instrument to revoke a trust that has not been signed yet. That is what I want you to understand about that morning. The papers for the shop were drawn in October, and they were sitting in a lawyer's office in Rapid City, and I had told 400 people on an invitation card that I would put my name to them in front of the whole town on the anniversary. That was the only thing standing between my daughter and everything my father's hands and my wife's hands ever made. And she had sent a man in a good coat to make sure I could not hold a pen when the day came. Gregory took a fountain pen out of his coat and set it on the paper on the line turned toward me. I looked at that pen for a while. Then I said I could not read the small print without my glasses, and I reached out with my right hand for the top page, and I let the tremor have my arm. There is a pickle pot at the end of my bench. It is a small crock, and it sits on a hot plate, and there is acid in it kept just under a simmer, and every piece of metal that comes off my torch goes in there to be cleaned. It has sat in that same spot since the Ford administration. Every man who has ever worked in this shop knows it is there the way you know where your own kitchen sink is. My forearm went into it and took it off the plate. It came over on its side, and it went out across that bench in a sheet, and it ran under those documents and over them and off the front edge onto the floor. And there was a smell like a hot penny, and the steam came up in a wall between me and that lawyer. He got out of his chair backward and put his hip into the wall. The paper went dark and buckled from the middle out. The ink on the signature lines ran down toward the edge of the bench in little gray threads. 3 sets, all of it. Gregory had them stacked square the way a careful man stacks things, and being stacked square is what finished them. And from the doorway, my daughter said, "Can you not do one thing right?" It came out of her at full voice. It went off the pressed tin ceiling in that shop, and it went out through the front, and I know Angie heard every word of it at the counter, because Angie told me later exactly where she was standing. The steam kept going up. Nobody moved. Then my daughter crossed that floor and put both arms around my shoulders and said, oh, Dad, I am so sorry. That was not about you. I have not slept. We can do it again next week. It does not matter." She was warm. She smelled like the candle. Her chin was on top of my head, and I sat there in my own chair with acid running off my bench onto my boots, and I let her hold me. And over the top of her arm, I watched a lawyer on his knees on my floor, trying to pick up wet paper by the corners. They were gone by 10:30. Gregory said he would print another set. Angie locked the front door at 4 in the afternoon, which she has done twice in 30 years, and both of those times, somebody had died. She came back and put a ledger on my bench, not a shop book. A green-covered account book, the kind you buy in a drugstore with the corners gone soft. She set it down in front of me and put her hand flat on top of it for a second before she took her hand away. She said I have been keeping this since 2022. She said your wife asked me to. The book opened flat, the way a book does when it has been opened 1,000 times. Angie keeps accounts better than any system a man could buy. Date on the left, what went out, what it was worth, and in the last column in her small square hand, where it went out from. Register, consignment, scrap, register. The first page is 2022, and the numbers on it are the kind of numbers a father tells himself are the cost of having a child who is having a hard time. $200, $400. A pair of earrings at $1,100 that a woman had left with us to sell for her, which means it was not even my money to lose. By the third page, the numbers have gotten used to themselves. I sat there and turned pages for a long time, and Angie stood on the other side of the bench with her arms folded and did not say one word. And at the back of the book, on the inside of the cover, she had run a total in pencil and gone over it twice. $341,400 and change. 4 years. Out of a shop that clears what a shop like mine clears in a town of 80,000 people. That is, a truck, a house, a college education, and about a year and a half of my own life measured in hours at that bench. And it went out the front door in handfuls, while I stood in the back with a torch in my hand, telling everybody she was doing better. I asked Angie why she never brought it to me. She said your wife asked me to keep it, and then your wife died, and I did not know who I was keeping it for anymore. She said she made up her mind 4 separate times to put it in front of me, and every time she got as far as my doorway, she looked at me and thought, he has just lost her, or he is not well, or he has enough on him. And she went back out front and sold somebody a watch battery. Then she said the thing I have not been able to shake. She said I thought I was being kind. There is one line in that book from the 9th of April, 2022. $600 out of the register. It is the 4th line down on that page, in the same hand, with no comment beside it. We buried my wife on the 9th of April. I closed the book. I told Angie to put it in the safe and to not tell one living soul it existed. And she asked me if I wanted her to call anybody, and I said not yet. Then I went home and slept 4 hours and got up at 2 in the morning and started driving east. Dela Cruz had cut a wedge out of that pad before he gave the brace back to me. He did it without asking. He took it out of the far corner where the strap covers it, and he sewed the lining down over the hole so it would sit against my arm the same as ever. And he put the wedge in a jelly jar with a rubber seal. And he said when you find your laboratory, do not let a woman in a white coat put it in her pocket. That jar was in my coat on the passenger seat. Interstate 90 East out of Rapid City is 5.5 hours of the same thing. You go up over the last of the hills, and then the land quits pretending and lies down flat all the way to the Missouri. And in March, it is white and brown, and the wind comes across the road in a way you can feel in the wheel. There is nothing out there to look at, which is the point. I did not want anything to look at. I passed Wall in the dark and Chamberlain in full morning, and somewhere past Mitchell, I pulled into a rest area and put my head down on the wheel for a while. The place I found is in an industrial park on the north side of Sioux Falls, between a fire equipment company and the place that sells pallet racking. No sign on the road. A number on the door. Inside a counter with a sheet of glass across the top of it, and a bell you push, and it smells like a school hallway and bleach. The man who came out was maybe 50. Beard, wedding ring, reading glasses pushed up. He asked what I had. I put the jelly jar on the counter. He asked who referred me. I said nobody. He asked for a name and an insurance card, and I took an envelope out of my coat and put it beside the jar. Cash. I had gone to 3 different branches to get it. I told him I did not want my name in a computer. I did not want a claim filed. I did not want a copy of anything mailed to a house. I told him I was not asking him to do anything unlawful. I was asking him to do the work and hand me the paper and forget my face. He looked at the envelope a long moment. Then he asked me what I thought was in it. I said I did not know. I said I had been wearing it against my skin for 11 weeks, and I would like to know why my hands do not work. He took the jar and turned it under the light on the counter. Then he set it down and went to a dispenser on the wall and pulled on a pair of gloves, the heavy blue kind, and picked the jar up again with the gloves on. And he did that without any particular hurry and without saying anything about it. And that was the moment my stomach went out from under me. He said 10 days. The mass work goes out to a machine, and the machine has a queue. Then he said, is there any of this still on you? I said there was. He said, get it off. He said, I do not know what this is yet, and I do not want to guess in front of a customer. But you have been carrying a jar into my shop, and I have been doing this 19 years, and you should not let that touch your skin again. I told him I could not do that yet. He looked at me over the top of his glasses for about 4 seconds. Then he said, there is a draw station 2 blocks down that takes walk-ins. Get a tube of blood and bring it back here before you leave town. And he wrote something on a card and slid it under the glass. I got back on the interstate a little after 2 in the afternoon and drove west into the sun. It went down past Prescio, and after that, the traffic coming at me was headlights, and every set of them wore a ring of yellow, and I was 90 miles from home before it came up in me. The last winter she was alive, my wife stopped driving after dark. She said the oncoming lights had gotten to be too much. She said they had rings around them. I told her to get her eyes checked. She said she would. Deadwood in March is one street of lit windows in a gulch with the snow coming down through the light. 45 minutes north of my shop, You come up through Boulder Canyon with the rock close on both sides and the creek black under the ice. And then the road bends, and the whole town is there in the bottom of the draw. Brick fronts from 1890, gold letters, and behind every door, the sound. If you have never heard it, it does not sound like money. It sounds like a room full of small birds. There are 8 or 9 places on Main Street where a person can lose whatever they came in with. And I went into the first 3 of them with my hat in my hand at 11 in the morning, like a man looking for a lost dog. I had a photograph. It is 4 years old, and it is the last one taken of her that I have, at a table at the Alpine Inn with her mother. And I had to fold my wife out of it before I could carry it around and show it to strangers. The first 2 shift managers were polite and told me nothing, which is what they are trained to do. The third one was a woman about 60 with reading glasses on a chain, and she looked at that photograph a good while, and she did not say yes, and she did not say no. She said, "Honey, there is a fellow down the block who buys from people like her before they come in here." Then she gave me back the picture and went and stood somewhere else. Faulkner Loan is at the low end of the street with a barred window and a bell on a spring. Corey Faulkner is 61 years old, and he has that shop the way I have mine, which is to say his father had it. He was reading a hunting catalog with his boots on a milk crate. When I came in, he put the catalog down and looked at me for about 2 seconds, and then he stood up, because he knew what I was. Not who, what. A pawnbroker in a gambling town can tell an owner from a customer at 9 feet. I told him my name, and I told him what I make. He said, "I know your mark." And then he reached under the counter and took out a book, a paper book with a rubber band around it. And I will say to you that I have now seen 2 men in 1 week open a paper ledger for me, and both of them are the reason my daughter is where she is today. And there is a lesson in that about the kind of records that do not get erased. He turned the case light on and unlocked the back of the display and started setting things on the glass. 9 pieces. A leaf and grape bracelet in 3 colors. Mine, 1998, made for a woman named Dolores Vandersloot, who is dead now, and whose daughter had it last. 2 rings. A money clip I made for a rancher out of Buffalo Gap and hallmarked in '92. A pendant great cluster on a yellow leaf, the twin of the one Jericho stamped in front of me the night this all started. Every one of them with an F in an oval and 2 dots underneath. I picked them up one at a time. That is what took the time. Because I did not just see a pile of gold on a piece of glass. I saw a woman crying in my shop in 1998 because her husband had finally done something right. And I saw a rancher counting hundreds out of a clip with a bad thumb. And I said their names out loud in that pawn shop while Faulkner stood there and let me. He did not hurry me. I want that on the record about him. The 8th piece was a small oval yellow gold with a letter A cut into the face of it in script. I made that one in my own shop 2 Christmases ago, and I put it in my daughter's hands in my own kitchen. And there is a nail over her sofa where it is not hanging. Faulkner read out of his book. 11 months ago, $80. I set it down on the glass, and I asked him to show me the last one. He did not go get it out of the case. He turned around and opened a little steel drawer behind the register, the kind a man keeps behind him for things he has not decided about, and he took out a ring and put it in front of me and stepped back a pace. Yellow gold, a 1/4-inch band worn thin on the palm side, the way a working woman's band goes thin, with a rose gold vine running around the outside of it. I made that in 1980 for a girl named Adeline Weber, and I cut the vine into it by hand at my father's bench with my father's graver, and she wore it every day for 42 years, including the day she died. Faulkner ran his finger down the page. He said, 11 April 2022. He said, $200. We buried my wife on the 9th of April 2022. I asked him if he was certain. He turned the book around and pushed it across the glass so I could read the line myself in his hand, in blue ink, with a driver's license number written out beside it. I know that number. It is on a form in a drawer in my house from the 3rd time I paid for a bed with a locked door. He said he had held that one back and never put it in the case. He said in his line, you get a feeling about a piece. I took out my wallet and I put $200 on the glass. He would not touch it. He said the piece was mine and had always been mine. I told him he had bought it in good faith and I was not going to take money out of a man's pocket for doing his job honestly, and we went back and forth on it, two old men in a pawn shop in the snow, and in the end, he took the money because I made him. I bought the other 8 back too. He charged me his cost and nothing over it. Then I went outside. The snow had picked up. It came down the gulch between the buildings and went sideways under the streetlight and settled on the shoulders of my coat. Somewhere behind me a door opened and the birds got loud, and then the door closed and they went quiet again. I had a ring in my right hand, in the fist with the brace against my wrist. There is a thing I have not thought about in years. When I cut that vine in 1980, I ran the graver off the line at the back of the band and had to burnish the slip out, and you cannot see it, but I know where it is. My thumb went and found it. It found it in about 4 seconds in the cold without looking. Across the street, a man came out and scraped his windshield with a credit card. A truck went up the grade, and I heard it change gear twice. The steam from the vents on the roofs went straight up and then bent. I stood on that sidewalk for a while. Then I put the ring in my shirt pocket, which is where my father carried things, and I walked up the hill to my truck. And on the drive home, there was a question sitting in the seat next to me, and I knew exactly what it was, and I did not ask it out loud for another 2 days. There is a drawer in my shop that I have not opened in 4 years. It is the second one down on the left side of the bench under the north window. It is not locked. It has never been locked. It is 9 inches of pine with a brass pull that I put on myself. I have walked past it something like 1,400 times in 4 years, and I go around the end of that bench rather than reach across the front of it. The question that rode home with me from Deadwood was not a complicated question. It was this: if my daughter would take her mother's wedding band off the dresser and put it on a counter in a gambling town 2 days after we buried her, then what would my daughter not do? I carried that for 2 days. I worked. I ate what Angie put in front of me. On the second night, I locked the front door at 9 o'clock and turned off every light in that building except the lamp over my wife's bench, and I sat down on her stool and looked at that drawer for 40 minutes. I want to say something about why it took 4 years. People will tell you that a man cannot open a drawer like that because of what is inside it. That is not right. I have known since the day she died exactly what is in there: her loop, her needle files, her burr box, the reading glasses she bought at the drugstore and would not admit she needed. You cannot open it because of what it is. It is 9 inches of pine that a woman shut on a Friday afternoon with her ordinary hands, meaning to open it again on Monday, and as long as nobody opens it, there is one thing left in the world that is still exactly the way she left it. I opened it at 9:20. The loop was on the left where it always was, with the elastic gone slack. The needle files in their roll. The burr box with the lid a little cocked because it never did shut square. 2 pencils, a tin of hand salve, everything smelling of the salve and of old oiled steel, and under all of it, that other smell that is not anything, that is only the inside of a drawer that has been closed a long time. There was a business card face down at the back. I turned it over. A law office on 6th Street, a man's name I had never heard, and under it, in my wife's hand, a date and a time. In November of 2021, I looked at that card for a while, and I could not make it mean anything. I set it on the bench, and under the needle file roll, there were 2 envelopes. Standard white envelopes sealed, her hand on the front of both. One says my name, the way she wrote it all in capitals, the way she addressed everything. The other one says, Daniela, not dream, Daniela. I sat there with those 2 envelopes in my hands, and the lamp on, and the whole building dark behind me, and I could not do it. 70 years old. A man who had spent that week showing his daughter's photograph to strangers in bars, and I could not get my thumb under the flap of an envelope with my wife's handwriting on the front of it. I put them in my inside coat pocket. That is where they stayed for 11 days. Then I took the file roll out to see what was under it. There was a brace in the bottom of that drawer, leather, hand-stitched. A thumb spica for the left hand, the small size, with a steel stay down the thinner side, and a shearling face and 2 nickel buckles instead of 1, because a narrow wrist rides on a single buckle. My wife set stones left-handed. She was the only left-handed stone setter I have known in 50 years in this trade, and the first joint of her left thumb was gone by the time she was 60, the way it goes on setters, the way the carpal tunnel goes on engravers. I picked it up and I turned it over and I put my thumbnail against the seam. Same hand, same wax thread, same run of stitching a man in Hermosa has been putting into leather since 1971. And inside it, under the shearling, a lining sewn down with a machine and the wrong weight of thread. I did not open it. That mattered later. I did not touch the inside of it at all. I set it on the bench under the lamp beside the business card and sat back down. And then I remembered the fall. 2021, October. Our daughter came home from the fourth place with the locked door, and she was so good. I have to use that word because it is the word we used. Adeline and I said it to each other in the kitchen. She is so good this time. She came to Sunday dinner 3 weeks running. In November, she brought her mother a present for no reason at all, wrapped in paper she had creased at the corners with her own hands. And her mother opened it at the table and put it on and said it was the first thing that had helped in 2 years. Her mother wore it every day for 5 months. And in February, my wife caught her in the back of this shop with casting grain in her coat pocket, and she did not scream and she did not cry. Adeline stood right where I am telling you this from, and she said 7 words to our daughter. She said, "You will never own 1 inch of this shop." And I said, "She is our daughter." That is what I said. Standing right there, in front of both of them, my wife looked at me for about 2 seconds, and then she went out and got her coat, and we drove home, and we did not say 1 word in the truck, and we never spoke about our daughter again, because there was nothing left to say after I said that. 19 days later, she went down on the kitchen floor. The ground was still frozen, so she was in a vault at the funeral home for 3 weeks before we could put her in it, and we buried her on the 9th of April. The lamp buzzed a little, the way it does. Outside, a car went up Main Street, and the sound came in off the storefronts across the way. The heat came on, and the ductwork over the polishing room made the tick it has made since 1984. My hands were flat on the top of the bench on either side of that brace, and I could feel the grain of the wood under the left one where the finish is gone. There is a mark on the front edge of her bench, a burn about the size of a thumbnail from a torch tip she set down in 1991. I looked at that for a while. Then I stood up and I went and got the bucket. I washed every bench top in that shop. I took the trays out of the wall unit and washed them one at a time and dried them and put them back in order. I swept and then I mopped, and then I got down on the floor with a putty knife and cleaned the gold dust out of the seams of the boards under my own bench and put the sweepings in the scrap bin, which is a job I have paid a boy to do twice a year for 30 years. I did that until 10 minutes past 4 in the morning. I did not cry. I did not call anybody. I cleaned my shop. Then I sat down on my own stool with my hands hanging between my knees, and I looked at my wife's brace on my wife's bench under my wife's lamp. And at 22 minutes past 4, I got out the burner phone and called a number in Sioux Falls and left a message on a machine in an industrial park. I said, "This is the cash customer from Tuesday." I said, "I have a second sample." He said 10 days. He called me on the 8th. That is the whole thing right there. Nobody calls early with good news. Good news waits its turn in a queue with everything else. And a man with 19 years in a laboratory does not pick up a phone 2 days ahead of schedule to tell you that your felt is felt. It was 7:45 in the morning, and I was in my truck in the alley behind the shop with the engine running for the heat. He asked me to confirm the number he had written on my envelope. I gave it to him. Then he was quiet for a second, and when he started talking again, his voice had gone flat, in a way I recognized, because it is the voice I use on the telephone when I have to tell a woman that what her mother left her is plated. He said the carrier was a solvent. He said the name of it. He said it is sold by the quart in any place that sells things for horses, and that its whole purpose in this world is to carry other substances through skin, and that nothing about it belongs against a human arm for 11 weeks. Then he told me what was riding in it, a heart drug. He said the name twice, once fast and once slow. And he spelled it for me because he could tell I was writing on the back of a fuel receipt with a carpenter's pencil. It is a real medicine. Old Common sitting in a cabinet in half the nursing homes in this state, and in a body that needs it, and at a size a doctor picks, it steadies a heart. In a body that does not need it, coming in through the skin at all hours with nobody counting it, does the other thing. He said the words nausea and confusion and tremor. He said the word arrhythmia and I put the pencil down. And he said that at a certain point, a man will start seeing halos around lights, yellow and green. He said it is one of the oldest signs there is. It has been written up for 200 years, and that any physician who had been told to look for it would have found it in about 4 minutes. Nobody had been told to look for it. They had all been told the man was 70. Then he told me about the layering. He said the felt from my brace did not read as one thing. He said it read as two. An older saturation all through the fibers, and then a second one on top of it, newer, sitting higher in the material and stronger, laid in after the first had already gone deep. He said somebody recharged this. He asked me when I had last had the item out of my possession, and I sat there in that alley with the heater roaring, and I told him that I had handed it to a man in a white coat in a kitchen, and asked him to make it gentler on my skin, and that I had thanked him for it. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said the second sample. He said the second one is the same compound and the same carrier. And he said the concentration in the second one is not in the same country as the first. I asked him to put that in a way I could carry into a room with a lawyer in it. He said if the first one was meant to take a long time, the second one was not meant to take a long time. I did not go to the shop. I called Angie and told her I had errands, and she did not ask me one question, which is the kindest thing anybody did for me that whole month. I drove out to Mountain View. The gate road had been plowed once and drifted over again, and I put the truck through it and left it running. It is up on the west side with the hills behind and the whole town laid out below. And in March, there is nobody up there at all. Snow to the top of the vases. Somebody's plastic wreath from Christmas gone the color of a dish rag. Her stone is granite gray, with the lettering cut V groove and filled. I did not carve it. A man in Sturgis carved it. I stood in my own shop with an engraver in my hand that my father had held, and I could not make myself cut my wife's name, and so it is another man's letters on that stone. And it always will be, and there is not a thing on this earth I can do about that now. I stood there with my hand in my coat. The envelopes were in the inside pocket. I could feel the corner of one of them through the lining, and I stood in the snow at the foot of my wife's grave with my hand on 2 letters she wrote, and I did not take them out, and I want you to know, I have no explanation for that, which will satisfy anybody, including me. What I had was a piece of felt. That is all I had. A piece of felt out of a drawer with poison in it, and a leather man's book, and a bookkeeper's ledger, and a pawn ticket. Every one of those things proves that somebody meant to do a thing. Not one of them proves that it was ever done. Not one of them puts that substance inside my wife. And without that, she is a 66-year-old woman with a bad heart who died in her kitchen. And any lawyer worth his shoes would say so in about 9 seconds. There is exactly one way to prove what is in a body that has been in the ground for 4 years. You dig it up. She would have hated it. She hated fuss. She would not let me put a notice in the paper when her own mother died. She wanted to go in the ground and be left in it, and she said so at that table in our kitchen more than once, and I heard her say it. I stood up there in the wind for about 20 minutes. Here is the thing I did not say out loud on that hill, and have not said out loud since, and am saying now because I am telling all of it. I was not afraid of being wrong. A man who is wrong gets to go home. He gets to be a foolish old man who thought a terrible thing about his own child, and he carries that, and he lives. I was afraid of being right. Because if I was right, then it happened twice. And both times, I was standing close enough to touch her. I got back in the truck. The Pennington County State's Attorney is in the courthouse on St. Joseph Street, and I found a place at a meter across from it and shut the engine off at 10 minutes past 11. I sat there while the meter ran out. I fed it and sat there while it ran out again. A woman came and went from the door twice with the same file box. The sun came around off the courthouse windows and went off the hood of my truck and moved on. At 10 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, I got out and crossed the street. 15 years ago, somebody came through the back wall of my shop with a cutting wheel and took $11,000 in finished work off my shelves. The man the state sent found him in 4 days. He did it by sitting in my front room one whole afternoon, asking who knew where I kept my torch, and at the end of it, he told me the answer was a boy who had swept my floor 2 summers before. And he was right. I have never forgotten the way he sat. He sat where he could see the door. I told the deputy state's attorney everything for about 40 minutes, with my hat on my knee. She let me get all the way to the end. Then she asked whether I had kept the receipts from the laboratory, and I said I had, and she picked up her telephone. Stephen Roy came in the next morning at 9, and he was gray now, and he still would not put his back to a door. They gave us a room with no window and a table with a wood grain sticker on it. I emptied a canvas tote onto it in the order I had gotten the things, because I wanted him to walk it the way I had walked it. Angie's Green account. Book 4 years, $341,000 in a bookkeeper's hand. A page copied out of a leather shop ledger in Hermosa with a name and a date on it. A pawn ledger out of Deadwood with a driver's license number written beside my wife's wedding band. 2 reports out of a laboratory in an industrial park in Sioux Falls, and a receipt for a tube of my own blood drawn at a walk-in clinic 2 blocks from it, with my name spelled correctly on the label. And last, a leather brace with a lining sewn shut over a hole where a wedge had been cut out of it. Roy read for a long time. He is not a fast reader, and he does not pretend to be. He put on drugstore glasses, and he went through Angie's book page by page with a pencil in his hand. And he did not say one word until he got to the back cover, where she had run the total twice. Then he said, "This is the best-kept evidence I have ever been handed by a civilian." He went through the laboratory pages twice. The second time, he stopped and he tapped the paragraph about the layering, and he tapped it again. He said, "Everything else on this table is a story. A defense lawyer will tell a jury an old man got sick and went looking for a reason, and juries let that in." He said, "This paragraph is not a story. This says the article was serviced. That is a second trip, and a second trip is a second decision." He said a man can talk his way out of one decision. Then I put the business card on the table. He read the name and turned it over and read my wife's handwriting on the back and asked me if I knew what that appointment was. I said I did not. He asked if I wanted to know, and I said I did. And he put it in a folder and said he would find out and that it would take him a few days. Then he leaned back and asked me a question that had nothing to do with anything on that table. He said, "Do you know who called for the ambulance the morning your wife died?" I sat there. I have thought about that morning 10,000 times. The kitchen, the light on over the stove, the chair, the 2 of them coming in with the bag. And I could not tell you one thing about how they got there because I was on the floor with her. Roy already had the file. He had pulled it before I ever walked in the building. He said Jericho Luna. He said the call came in at 8:41 in the morning from the landline in your kitchen. And he read me part of what the boy said to the dispatcher. And I am not going to put those words in this account. He said we took a short statement from him that day because he was the one who let the crew in the door. Then he said, "And there is a line in it I would like you to explain to me." He turned the page around. It was a form. And near the bottom, in a deputy's handwriting, was one sentence. The witness stated the daughter's vehicle was parked in the rear alley when he arrived and was gone when he came back out. He said nobody followed up. There was no reason to. The woman had a heart condition on her chart, and a doctor signed it out. I asked Roy if there was anything else in it. He said no. He said just that one line from a 25-year-old kid who found his boss's wife on a kitchen floor. I sat there and did the arithmetic on Jericho Luna. 4 years of locking my shop every night with that in his chest, and the day he finally opened his mouth, he got as far as 3 thefts and shut it again. And here is the thing that took the wind out of me. He did it because he did not want to hurt me. That is the same reason Angie kept a ledger in a drawer for 4 years and sold watch batteries instead of putting it in my hands. It is the same reason my wife drove to a lawyer on 6th Street by herself in November and never told me she went. And it is the same reason I stood in my own shop and said she is our daughter to a woman who was trying to save all of us, including me, including her. Every single one of us protected the man in the middle of it from the truth. And the man in the middle of it was standing right there the whole time with his hands in his pockets. Roy shut the folder and let me sit. The heat in that building came on somewhere and ran and shut off. There was a chair in the corner with a coat over the back of it that belonged to somebody else. Through the wall, I could hear 2 people talking with a wall in between, so you got the shape of it and none of the words. Then Roy told me what he wanted to do, which was arrest both of them that night. He had enough. He said it plain. He said, "I can have them in custody by 10 o'clock, and you can sleep in your own house without that thing on your arm. I told him, no. I told him about the anniversary. 400 invitations already in 400 mailboxes. The trust papers drawn and sitting unsigned in an office in this town. I said I built that shop in the daylight in front of this whole town, and I was not going to hand it over in the dark, and I was not going to have my daughter taken out of a bedroom at 10 o'clock at night, where the only people who ever saw it were 2 officers and a dog. Roy looked at me a while. Then he said, if we do it your way, you keep wearing it. He said 12 more days. He said, I will have the exhumation order and the forensic work back before then. And I am telling you as a man and not as an agent that I do not like what those 12 days will cost you. I said I understood. He walked me to the door of that room. And then he stopped with his hand on the frame and asked me the last question, and it is the only question anybody asked me in this whole business that I could not answer. He said, and if she comes to you before that day, he said, if she gets in front of you and says the one thing you have been waiting 41 years to hear her say, he said, are you still going to push the button? The clock over the polishing room door came off the wall for the first time since I hung it in 1984. Roy brought the equipment out to the shop himself, in a hard case, in the middle of a Tuesday, wearing a jacket with a plumbing company on the back of it. He told me what I already suspected, which is that it is my building and my telephone line and my business, and the man may record what happens inside his own walls in this state, and that if I did it any other way than the way he told me, none of it would ever be played in a courtroom. Then he left because he could not be there for the rest of it. I told Jericho in the back with the front door locked and the close sign turned. I told him what Roy had shown me, the call at 8:41, the line in the deputy's handwriting about a car in the alley. He got very still, and then he sat down on the floor, not in a chair, on the floor with his back against the wall, under the tool board. A 29-year-old man with hands like mine were at 30, and he put his arms over his head. He said he was 25. He said she was gone by the time the truck came, and he did not know what it meant. He did not know anything meant anything, and by the time he knew enough for it to mean something, it had already been a year of him not saying it. He said the box on the back step. He had forgotten about the box for a long time, and then he had not been able to stop remembering it. A cardboard box taped, and he moved it out of the way of the crew and set it against the fence and never saw it again. Then he said, I have wanted to tell you for 4 years, and every day I did not, it got heavier. And every day it got heavier. It got harder to lift. I stood there and looked down at that boy on my floor. Here is what I want to say about that minute, because I have turned it over more than almost anything else in this account. I did not forgive him because I am generous. I forgave him because I finally understood what I was looking at. He had done exactly what I had done. He had loved somebody enough to keep a knife out of their hand, and the knife was the truth, and the person he was protecting was the only person who could have used it. I got him up off the floor. I said, we are going to put a camera in my wife's shop. We did it that night, with the lights off in the front and one bench lamp burning in the back, so it would look the way it always looks. He took the clock down. There is a bracket behind it and a hole in the plaster where the old cord ran when that clock was an electric, before I put a movement in it in '96. The lens went in the hole. He dressed the wire down the inside of the wall cavity with a fish tape and brought it out behind the tool board, and he did that work the way he does everything, which is slow and once. At 11:40 on Thursday night, the front door of my shop opened with a key. I was 2 miles away in my own kitchen with a laptop on the table and the picture coming up green and gray. They came through the front and back to the bench room, and they did not turn on the overhead. She used the light on her phone. She went straight to the safe in the corner and put her hand flat on the door of it and stood there like that. And then she said something to him I could not hear because she said it into the wall. Then she pulled out a stool and sat down. She sat in her mother's chair. 4 years. Not Angie, not Jericho, not me, not one of the boys who has come and gone through that bench room. And my daughter walked in at midnight and dragged it out and sat in it with one boot up on the rung. Callan stayed standing. That is the whole shape of those 2 people in one sentence. He started in about how he was not sleeping. He said he had not slept a full night since Christmas. He said it in a whisper that came out of the speakers on my kitchen table as clear as a man talking to me across a booth. He said there has to be a version of this where we stop. He said he is not the same. As before, he is not going down the way you said he would, and he has been off it and back on it. And he knows something, Dream. I am telling you, he knows something. He said he had started keeping the rest of it out in this car because he could not stand having it in the apartment. He said one night in February, he drove out past the airport with it in the trunk and sat there in the dark with the engine off for about an hour. He said, and then I drove home, and it is still in the trunk. She let him talk. That is what she did. She let him get all the way to the end of it, and she looked at the floor while he did, and I sat in my kitchen with my hands flat on the table because I did not know yet what I was watching. And then my daughter said, whose handwriting is on the pharmacy order? She said it without raising her voice at all. She said, whose hands made it? She said, whose name is in the leather man's book? She said, I have never touched any of it. I have never been in a room where any of it was made. And if you walk into a building and open your mouth, the only thing you will accomplish is going by yourself. Callan did not say anything. She said, and there is a ticket in my name for the 11th out of Rapid City, and none of it has your name on it either. So you might want to think about which side of this you want to be standing on when it is over. He said her name once, and she said it took 19 days last time. She said he is tougher than Mom was. I sat in my kitchen. The refrigerator ran and shut off. There was a plate in the sink from a supper I do not remember eating. The picture on that laptop was green and gray, and the clock on my wall in that shop 2 miles away was ticking into the microphone, and I could hear it, the same clock I put up the year my daughter was in the 2nd grade. The furnace came on under the floor. My coffee had gone cold at some point, and there was a ring of it dried on the wood beside the cup. I looked at my hands on the table on either side of that computer. The right one had the brace on it. There was gold dust in the crease of the left one in the lines the way there has been since I was 20. When she was in the 2nd grade, she used to stand on that stool with her chin on the edge of the bench and watch me solder. And afterward, she would lean over and blow on the joint because she had seen me do it, and it did not do one thing. Outside, a dog went off 2 streets over and quit. After a while, I reached out and moved the bar backward on the screen and watched the last part of it again. Callan stands there. He is quiet for 4 seconds. Then he nods. And my daughter puts both arms straight up over her head and arches her back the way a person does at the end of a long day, and holds it and lets it out and says she is going to bed. The lawyer who drew the trust papers called the shop on a Monday and asked Angie for one thing. He needed my daughter's legal name. That is how it works. And I did not know it either until he explained it. When a man puts his business into a trust and leaves his only child out of it, you do not simply leave her out. You name her. You state that you know she exists, you state what you are doing, and you have a notice served on her so that 4 years from now, she cannot stand in a courtroom and say the old man forgot he had a daughter. Her name has to be on the paper, spelled the way the state of South Dakota spells it. Angie said she would have it to him inside the hour. She has a file for everything. She went to the cabinet and pulled the folder we keep on family, and she had the birth certificate copy in it, and she typed the name into the state's records portal the way she has looked up 100 vendors and half the couples in this town. Nothing came back. She tried it with the middle initial. She tried it without. She tried the date of birth. She came into the back and stood at the end of my bench with her reading glasses up on her head and said, Alfredo, I cannot find her. I told her to look again. She looked again. Then she found her. Daniela Marie Francis existed in the records of this state until the 11th of June 2009. And on that date, in the circuit court in Rapid City, in a hearing that takes about 9 minutes, she stopped. There is a form. There is a filing fee. You publish a notice in a newspaper for 4 weeks, so anybody who is owed money by you can object. And if nobody objects, a judge signs it, and you go home under a different name. She was 24 years old. I was in that town. I was 2.4 miles from that courthouse. I was standing at this bench, setting stones in a bridal set for a girl from Belle Fourche, and my daughter was 6 blocks away in front of a judge getting rid of the only thing I had ever been able to give her. Angie printed the order and laid it on the bench and went out front. I sat there. a long time. Then I opened the second drawer on my right and took out the punch. I want to describe it because I do not think I have. It is a piece of tool steel about as long as my hand, square with the working face cut on the end of it. I cut that face in the spring of 1985 with a graver and a loop, and I did it 4 times before I had one I would put on my work. The letter F inside an oval, and under the F, 2 dots. I have hit that punch with a hammer somewhere north of 80,000 times. Every bracelet, every band, every leaf, every grape, every little thing anybody in 3 states pulls out of a box on a birthday and turns over to see who made it. 80,000 times, 1 dot for me, 1 dot for her. For 17 of those years, there has been no such person. I sat in my chair with that piece of steel in my hand, and I turned it over and over, and I want to tell you the truth about what that was. It was not the trust. It was not the money. It was not even the poison, and I know how that sounds. It was that she went into a building and had her name taken off, and she never mentioned it. Not once. Not at a dinner, not in an argument, not in the 4 years she has been signing my checks with a different last name and handing them to a teller who did not think twice. I was the last man in South Dakota to know. I took the 2 envelopes out of my inside coat pocket and set them on the bench under the lamp side by side. My name on one and Daniela on the other. I sat there with my hands on either side of them, and then I put them back in my pocket, and I have no better account of it than that. Roy called that afternoon. They picked up Daxton Gregory on Wednesday in the parking structure under his office, and it took a good deal less than an hour. He had been buying from Callan Chase for 2 years, which is what put him in that shop with a briefcase in the first place, and the second they laid it out for him, he asked what he could do for himself. Roy said he will not be a problem for you at the anniversary. Roy said he will not be a problem for anybody ever again. Then he asked me if I was still going to do it my way, and I said I was. I made the call at 7 that evening. I sat in the dark in my own kitchen, and I did not have to work at my voice, because by then, 12 days of that thing on my arm had done the work for me. She answered on the first ring. She did not ask how I was. I have gone back and forth on whether that matters. She said Dad, and then she waited, because she had been waiting for this call for 3 months. And she knew what it sounded like when it finally came. I told her I was tired. I told her the tremor was into my left hand now, which was true. I told her I could not get through a day at the bench anymore, and that I had been lying to everybody, including myself. I told her to bring the papers, all of them, the power of attorney, the directive, the one that stops the trust. I said I would sign every page. There was a sound on her end, like a chair. Then I said the rest of it. I said, but not in a kitchen, and not in a lawyer's office with a stranger watching. I said I built this in front of this whole town, and I will hand it over the same way. I said bring them to the anniversary, bring them to the museum on the 4th in front of the 400 people I invited, and I will stand up and tell every one of them what I am doing and why. And then I will sit down and sign whatever you put in front of me. She was quiet for about 6 seconds. Then my daughter said, "That is beautiful, Dad." She said Mom would have loved that. There is a kind of time that does not get measured with a clock. It gets measured by what you can still do when you wake up. I kept a page, 12 days, 1 line a day in pencil in the back of a shop book where nobody would look for it. I do not know why I did it except that measuring things is what I have always done instead of feeling them. Day 1. Right hand shakes at rest, can still hold a loop. Day 4. Cannot pour from a full pot with one hand. Day 6. Left hand now. Day 8. Dropped the ring clamp twice. Told Angie the spring is worn out. Bought a new clamp so the story would be true. Day 10. Halos in both eyes in daylight, not just under a lamp. Day 11. Cannot feel the edge of a bezel with my thumb. This is the one. That last line is 4 words long, and it took me a while to write it. A setter does not look at a bezel when he closes it. He feels it. There is a place where the metal stops moving and starts folding, and it comes up through the tool into your thumb. And every man who does this work will tell you the same thing, that his hands know it before his eyes do. I could not feel it anymore. I wrote it down, and I closed the book. She came to the shop the night before the anniversary, alone. It was a little after 9. I had one lamp on, and I was not working. I was sitting and she knocked on the glass out front instead of using her key, which she has not done in 20 years. She had takeout from the Thai place on Mount Rushmore Road. She put it on the front counter, and she did not open it. She wandered back through the bench room the way she used to when she was small, touching things. The polishing wheels, the rack of her mother's files. She asked me about Mom, not a question with an edge on it. She asked what her mother was like when she was young before, and whether it was true that she could set a stone faster than I could. And I said it was true and had always been true, and my daughter laughed, and the laugh was real. I have replayed it. It was real. She sat on the floor with her back against the safe with her knees up 30-year-old boots and a 41-year-old face, and she said, "I know I have been a lot." She said, "I am sorry, Dad." She has said those words to me maybe 200 times in her life, and there was something different in it that night, and I have made my peace with never knowing what. Maybe she meant it. People are not one thing all the way through. Maybe some small part of that woman came up to the surface for a minute in that room in front of her mother's bench on the last night when it would have cost her anything to be honest. I sat there and I let it happen. I am not sorry that I did. Then she leaned her head back against the door of that safe and rolled it side to side, and she asked me what the combination was. She said it easy. She said you should give it to me anyway for after tomorrow. In case something happens in the night, you would not want Angie locked out of the payroll. And that was that. I told her the numbers were written down at the house and I would bring them in the morning. She left at 10:20 and took the food with her. I sat in that shop, and then I took the 2 envelopes out of my inside coat pocket, and this time I opened them because there was nothing left in me holding the flap shut. The one with my name on it is 4 lines long. She wrote that she had gone to a lawyer in November. She wrote that she did it without me, because she knew exactly what I would say, and she did not have another argument left in her. She wrote that the papers had been drawn since the week before Thanksgiving, and that she had not signed them, that she had taken them out of the drawer twice and put them back both times. She wrote, "So you see, you are not the only coward in this family." Then she wrote that she had made an appointment to sign, and that she would tell me everything on Sunday, and that I would be angry with her for going alone. She wrote, "You should be." The second envelope says Daniela on the front. It is 3 lines. I am not going to give you all of it. Some of what a mother writes to her daughter is not for a room full of strangers, and I am the only one who will ever read the middle of it. But the beginning is this. I know what you are doing. I have known since November, and the end is this. I am telling your father on Sunday, and then it will not be my secret to carry any more. She never mailed it. Roy called me at 10:30 that night, and I had the letters open on the bench in front of me when the phone went off. He had run the business card. The office on 6th Street had the file in storage, and they had produced it that afternoon under the order. And he read me the 2 dates off the front of it. Instrument drawn the 17th of November, 2021. Appointment to execute. Monday, the 21st of March, 2022 at 10 in the morning. My wife died on Saturday the 19th. Roy said something after that, and I do not know what it was. I told him I would see him in the morning, and I set the phone down on the bench next to the 2 envelopes. She was not killed because she said it. She was killed because in about 36 hours, she was going to. I got up, and I went to my wife's bench, and I took the paper tray off the corner of it, and I blew the dust off the top of it, and there was the 40-year band, yellow gold, with the vine drawn out on the layout paper underneath it, in her hand and mine. I put the ring in the clamp. I got my father's graver out of the rack, the number 2, the one he used for vine work, and I put a scrap of stock in front of me to true the point. I made the first cut, and it wandered. I made another one. It wandered. I turned the scrap and started a fresh line, and my hand went out from under me somewhere between my wrist and the metal, in a place I cannot describe to you because it does not have a location, and the line ran off. I did that 17 times. On the 17th, my thumb slipped forward onto the heel of the tool and opened up along the pad, and a drop of it went down onto the bench pin and sat there on top of the sweepings. Red on gold. I did not say anything. I have not said anything about that night to one living person until right now. I shut off the lamp. I sat in that chair in the dark until the window over the front door went from black to gray, and I could hear the truck that does the papers come up Main Street and stop and go on and the heat came on twice. At 6 o'clock, I got up. I went home and I stood in front of the closet in my bedroom, and I put my hand on the shoulder of the charcoal suit, the one I have worn exactly once on the 9th of April 2022, and I took it off the rod. 400 people stood up when they wheeled me through the doors of the Journey Museum, and every one of them believed they were applauding a dying man. I let them. Jericho pushed the chair. He had on the one suit he owns, and he had gotten a haircut for it, and he wheeled me down the center aisle between two banks of folding chairs, slow enough that everybody could get a good look. Because that was the arrangement, and Jericho understood the arrangement better than anybody in that room except Roy and me. I saw Dela Cruz in the third row. He had driven up from Hermosa in his one good coat, and he sat with his hands folded and did not clap because he already knew how this story ended, and it did not call for clapping yet. I saw Faulkner near the back, next to a case of my own work the Historical Society had borrowed for the evening. I saw Angie in the front row, on the aisle, with a box of programs on her lap that she had proofread 4 times. My daughter was waiting at the podium in black. I want to tell you that plainly because I have thought about it since. Not navy, not gray. Black from the neck to the floor, the kind of dress a woman wears to bury somebody. And there was a suitcase in the trunk of her car in the parking lot with a one-way ticket folded inside a pocket of it. And I knew both of those things when I looked at her and smiled. Thomas Bradley stood beside her with a folder. Not Gregory. He was 3 days into a federal holding cell by then. The firm had sent a partner nobody had told anything, a clean young man with a clean folder. Because my daughter has never once in her life missed a detail like that. They wheeled me up to the podium. Jericho set the brake and stepped back exactly 2 feet, the way you would if you had rehearsed it, which he had. My daughter began. She said what daughters say. 50 years. A father who built something from nothing with his hands. A man who never once in half a century missed a Monday. She had it written on a card, and she read from the card, and her voice did the thing a trained voice does, which is to sound like it is not reading. 400 people listened to my daughter talk about my life, while I sat in that chair with a brace on my wrist and looked out at every person who had ever put money on my counter. And I thought about the fact that in about 4 minutes, I was going to take the last true thing she owned away from her, in front of every one of them. She finished. She turned to me. She said, "Dad, whenever you are ready." I did not stand up right away. I sat there and let the room go quiet. The real quiet. The kind that starts to worry people. And I looked out at 400 faces that had come there to watch an old man say goodbye to his life's work. I said I had built that shop with my father's tools in my hands and my father's voice nowhere in my ear, because we had not spoken in the last 6 years of his life. And I had learned since then what a man loses when a door shuts between him and someone he loves. And I had promised myself I would never let a door like that shut on my own child. I said I had kept that promise for 41 years. I said that a man can keep a promise so long and so hard that it stops being love and starts being something else, and that I had only found out what that something else was called in the last 5 weeks. Bradley shifted his folder. My daughter's smile did not move, but something behind it did. I reached out and I took the pen out of her hand. Then I set it down on the podium, and I said there was something the 400 of you should see first, and I nodded at Jericho, and the lights in that hall went down, and the screen behind me came alive. It was the shop. Green and gray, the way a camera sees a room at night. My daughter, sitting in her mother's chair. Her own voice came out of the speakers into that silent room. Clean, unmistakable. The words she has always used, and none of the words a daughter is supposed to use. Whose handwriting is on the pharmacy order. It took 19 days last time. He is tougher than Mom was. I did not turn around to watch the screen. I watched the room instead. I watched 400 faces I have known my whole life go from confusion to something with no name, and I watched Angie's hand go up over her mouth, and I watched Dela Cruz sit forward with his forearms on his knees, the way a man does at a funeral. I watched my daughter. She did not run. I will give her that because it is true and because everything else in this account has been true. She stood at that podium in her black dress with her own voice playing over the room, and she did not move at all, which was somehow worse than if she had screamed. Bradley had backed 3 full steps away from her before the recording finished. When the lights came up, I stood. I did it slowly because the legs had not been part of the performance. They had gone that stiff on their own from the chair. But I stood, and I stood straight. And 400 people who had just watched me confess a lie about my own health watched me confess a second one, which is that I had never been dying at all. I asked the room to indulge one more minute. I took the 2 envelopes out of my breast pocket. I told them whose handwriting was on the front. I did not read my own letter. I read hers. I read the letter my wife wrote to our daughter 4 years ago and never sent, in a room full of strangers, in my own voice, because Adeline never got the chance to say it in hers. I know what you are doing. I have known since November. I am telling your father on Sunday, and then it will not be my secret to carry anymore. I told them what the state's attorney's office had confirmed that week, that my wife had an appointment to sign away everything on a Monday in March 4 years ago, and that she died on the Saturday before it. I did not raise my voice once. I did not need to. The room did that for me. Special Agent Roy came through the side doors with 3 others behind him. And I want you to know that nobody in that hall needed telling who he was for. 400 people in a small city recognize the walk before they see the badge. He did not go to my daughter first. He went to Bradley and said 2 sentences quietly, and the young lawyer set his folder on a chair and put his hands where they could be seen and walked out of that room on his own 2 legs, which is more than either of the 2 people he came with that night were about to manage. Then Roy turned toward the podium. My daughter looked at me across 4 feet of empty carpet in her black dress, with the whole life she had planned sitting folded inside a suitcase in a parking lot she was never going to reach. Then she came down off that little riser, and she did not run from Roy. She walked toward me. And 400 people who had come to watch a man retire watched my daughter cross a museum floor and go down on her knees on the hard tile in front of my wheelchair in her funeral black, with her hands empty and open in her lap. She said, "Daddy." She said, "I'm your daughter." 41 years, and every single time she has said that sentence to me, some part of me has opened a door. I looked down at her on that tile floor. Black dress, empty hands, 400 people not breathing. And I understood standing there that this was the last time in my life I would ever be asked to answer that question, and that whatever I said in the next 10 seconds was going to be the truest thing I had ever told anybody, including myself. I let the silence run. Somewhere behind me, a folding chair creaked under somebody shifting their weight. Nobody coughed. 400 people in a room will always cough. It is what a room that size does. And that room did not do it. And I have never in my life heard a silence with that much weight in it before or since. I did not raise her up. I want that understood because a kinder story would have me lifting my daughter off that floor, and this is not a kinder story. I said your mother asked me a question once in this shop 41 years ago. I said she asked me whether love that keeps forgiving is love, or whether at some point it becomes something a person does instead of loving, so they never have to feel what it costs. I said I answered her wrong. I said it standing exactly where a coward stands, which is behind the word family. I said I am answering her again tonight. In front of every person who ever trusted me with a single ounce of gold, I am answering her the way I should have answered her the first time. I said no. I said it once, and I let the room keep the silence after it, instead of filling it myself. Because a man who has spent 41 years talking his way around a thing owes the world at least one sentence where he does not. I thought of the 2 dots under the letter F. 80,000 strikes of a hammer, and I understood finally that the second dot had never been about her. It had been about the version of her I kept building in my own head, the one who would come back if I only held the door open long enough. That version never existed anywhere except in me. She did not move for a long moment. Then something in her face closed the way a shop closes lights off one at a time, and she stood up on her own without help, and she did not look at me again. Behind us, near the side exit, I heard a chair scrape. Callan Chase had not run either. He had been standing at the back of that hall since the recording started, and he walked forward now with his hands already out in front of him. And before Roy's people had gotten a hand on him, he was talking. He told them where the car was. He told them what was in the trunk. He told them the name of the compounding pharmacy and the batch numbers, and he told them in a voice that came apart in the middle of it that he had wanted to stop in February and he had not been able to make himself, and that he was telling them everything right now, tonight, before anybody could ask him a second time. Somebody near the front started to cry quietly, and I never found out who. Roy's people took him out first. They walked my daughter out through the same doors a few minutes later, between two rows of people she has known her whole life, past Angie, who did not look away, past Dela Cruz, who took his hat off, and she held her chin up the entire length of that carpet. Because whatever else is true of her, she has never once in her life let a room see her flinch. There was a suitcase still sitting in the trunk of a car in that parking lot. I found out later that Roy's people logged it as evidence, and it is sitting in a warehouse in Rapid City to this day. Packed for a flight that left without her, and I have never once wanted to know what she folded into it. I did not watch her go. I looked at the empty podium instead, and at the pen still sitting where I had set it down. The hall cleared slowly after that. 400 people do not know how to leave a room like the one they had just been in, and most of them came by the chair on their way out and touched my shoulder or shook my hand, and did not have one single word to put with it. And I did not need them to. Jericho wheeled me out to the lot. The night was clear and cold, and there was a wind coming down off the hills that smelled like snow that had not decided yet whether it was coming. Dela Cruz walked out beside us without being asked and stood there with his hands in his coat, not saying anything, which is the only way that man has ever known how to say the important things. Angie came out a minute behind us with her coat half buttoned and the box of programs still on her hip, and she stopped a few feet off and looked at the three of us standing there in the cold, an old goldsmith, a leather man from Hermosa, and a boy of 29. And she did not say anything either, she just stood with us. After 30 years behind that counter, she had earned the right to stand wherever she wanted. I got up out of the chair on my own by the side of Jericho's truck and stood on the asphalt under the lot lights. And then, for no reason I can give you, and with no warning even to myself, I laughed. One sound, short and in the wrong place, and gone as fast as it came. Jericho turned and looked at me. I did not explain it to him. I am not going to explain it to you either, except to say that a man can carry a weight so long that the moment it leaves him, his body does something his mind never authorized, and mine picked laughing on a cold night in a parking lot 41 years and about 90 seconds after he finally told his own daughter no. Dela Cruz did not ask what was funny. He looked at me a moment, and then he looked away out toward the dark shape of the hills against the sky, and he let it be exactly what it was, which is the only kindness that ever actually helped me through any of this. I thought about a man in a leather shop 40 miles south of that parking lot, closing at 5 o'clock the way he has closed for 55 years, with no idea that a brace he had stitched the outside of had just ended in a museum in front of 400 people. He would hear about it eventually. Everybody in that county would. But right then, driving home in the dark, with his radio on, he was still just a man who had smelled something wrong on a Tuesday afternoon and said 4 words to a stranger. Take it off. Now. He never knew what those 4 words started. I have never found the right way to thank him for it, and I have stopped trying, because some debts are not the kind that get paid. They only get carried forward, the way a mark gets carried forward from one piece of work to the next. One strike of the hammer at a time. The ring sits on green felt in the front case, now between the door and the register, where the light from the street window catches the vine every time somebody comes in out of the cold. 40 years late. Rose gold around yellow the way she wanted it, and never once said so out loud. Some things only get finished after the hand that could have rushed them has stopped being able to. Love that keeps forgiving is not always love. Sometimes it is fear wearing love's coat, standing behind a door, because closing it would mean admitting a father can fail his child the same way his own father failed him. I spent 41 years believing an open door was the whole of the promise. I have since learned that a promise costs nothing if it never asks anything of you, and the door I was so proud of holding open was never brave. It was easy. My wife knew the difference before I did. She tried to tell me once in the kitchen, and I answered her wrong, and she carried that answer alone for 4 years because I had made it too heavy to hand back to me. I think of that more than almost anything else now. Not the poison. The 4 years she carried it by herself. There is a version of this story where I get my daughter back. This is not that story. What I have instead is a shop full of people who never once needed convincing to tell me the truth. And I have learned slowly to call that family too. I believe God sends the honest ones right when the dishonest ones have finished their damage. I thank Him for a stranger's hand closing on my wrist in time. I ask Him most nights for the strength to let my daughter go without letting go of having loved her. If your own child stood before you tonight and asked to be forgiven one more time, would you say yes? Not the first time, the one time you already knew what the forgiving would cost you before she opened her mouth. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in that shop, with her empty hands open in her lap. I read every one. If this story put a name to something you have carried alone, hit subscribe and let somebody else find their way here the way this one found you.